In a node, you're going to have three main places: input, configuration, and output. So let's just do a quick example where I'm going to delete this Google Drive node by clicking on the delete button. I'm going to add an AI node because there's a ton of different AI actions we can take as well. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to OpenAI's kind of like ChatGPT. So I'll click on that, and I'm just going to click on message a model. So once that pulls up, we're going to be using our n8n free OpenAI credits that we got earlier. And as you can see, we have to configure this node. What do we want to do? The resource is going to be text. It could be image, audio, assistant, whatever we want. The operation we're taking is we want to just message a model. And then, of course, because we're messaging a model, we have to choose from this list of OpenAI models that we have access to. And actually, it looks like this n8n free credits only actually give us access to a chat model. And this is a bit different. Not exactly sure why, probably just because they're free credits. So what we're going to do real quick is head over to OpenAI and get a credential so I can just show you guys how this works with input, configuration, and output. So basically, you'd go to openai.com, you'd come in here and you'd create an account if you don't already have one. If you have a ChatGPT account and you're on like maybe the $20 a month plan, that is different than creating an OpenAI API account. So you'd come in here and create an OpenAI account. As you see up here, we have the option for ChatGPT login or API platform login, which is what we're looking for here. So now that you've created an account with OpenAI's API, what you're going to do is come up to your dashboard and you're going to go to your API keys, and then all you'd have to do is click on create new key, name this one whatever you want, and then you have a new secret key. But keep in mind, in order for this key to work, you have to have put in some billing information in your OpenAI account. So throw in a few bucks, they'll go a lot longer than you may think, and then you're going to take that key that we just copied, come back into n8n, and under the credential section, we're going to click on create new credential. All I had to do now was paste in that API key right there, and then you have the option to name this credential if you have a ton of different ones. So I can just say, like demo on May 21st, and now I have my credential saved and named. Because now we can tell the difference between our demo credential and our n8n free OpenAI credits credential. And now hopefully we have the ability to actually choose a model from the list. So as you can see, we can access ChatGPT 4.0 latest, 3.5 turbo, 4, 4.1 mini, all this kind of stuff. I'm going to choose 4.1 mini, but as you can see, you can come back and change this whenever you want. And I'm going to keep this really simple. In the prompt, I'm just going to type in, tell me a joke. So now when this node executes, it's basically just going to be sending this message to OpenAI's model, which is GPT 4.1 mini, and it's just going to say, tell me a joke. And then what we're going to get on the output panel is the actual joke. So what I can do is come up right here and click on test step. This is going to run this node, and then we get an output over here. And as you can see, both with the input and the output, we have three options of how we want to view our data. We can click on schema, we can click on table, or we can click on JSON. And this is all the exact same data. It's just like a different way to actually look at it. I typically like to look at schema. I think it just looks the most simple and natural language. But what you can see here is the message that we got back from this OpenAI model was, sure, here's a joke for you. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. And what's cool about schemas is that this is all drag and drop. So now once we have this output, we could basically just use it however we want. So if I click out of here and I open up another node after this, and for now, I'm just going to grab a set node just to show you guys how we can drag and drop. What I would do is, let's say we wanted to add a new field, and I'm just going to call this OpenAI's response. So we're creating a field called OpenAI's response. And as you can see, it says drag an input field from the left to use it here. So as we know, every node we have input, configuration, output. On the input, we can basically choose which one of these things do we want to use. I just want to reference this content, which is the actual thing that OpenAI said to us. So I would drag this from here right into the value, and now we can see that we have what's called a variable. So anything that's going to be wrapped in these two curly braces and it's going to be green is a variable, and it's coming through as json.message.content, which is basically just something that represents whatever's coming from the previous node in the field called content. So we can see right here, json.message.content, we have message. Within message, we have basically a subfolder called content, and that's where we access this actual result, this real text. And you can see if I click into this variable, if I make it full screen, we have an expression, which is our JSON variable, and then we have our result, which is the actual text that we want back. So now, if I go ahead and test this step, we can see that we only get output to us OpenAI's response, which is the text we want. Okay, so this would basically be a workflow because we have a trigger and then we have our nodes that are going to execute when we hit test workflow. So if I hit test workflow, it's going to run the whole thing. And as you can see, super visual. We saw that OpenAI was thinking, and then we come over here and we get our final output, which was the actual joke. And now let me show you one more example of how we can map our different variables without using a manual trigger. So let's say we don't want a manual trigger. I'm just going to delete that. But now we have no way to run this workflow because there's no sort of trigger. So I'm just going to come back in here and grab a chat trigger just so we can talk to this workflow in n8n. I'm going to hook it up right here. I would just basically drag this plus into the node that I want. So I just drag it into OpenAI, and now these two things are connected. So if I went into the chat and I said hello, it's going to run the whole workflow, but it's not really going to make sense because I said hello and now it's telling me a joke about why don't scientists trust atoms. So what I would want to do is I'd want to come into this OpenAI node right here, and I'm just going to change the actual prompt. So rather than asking it to tell me a joke, what I would do is I'd just delete this. And what I want to do is I want OpenAI to go ahead and process whatever I type in this chat. Same way it would work if we were in ChatGPT in our browser, and whatever we type, OpenAI responds to. So all I'd have to do that is I would grab the chat input variable right here. I would drag that into the prompt section. And now if I open this up, it's looking at the expression called json.chatInput because this field right here is called chat input. And then the result is going to be whatever we type anytime, even if it's different 100 times in a row, it's always going to come back as a result that's different, but it's always going to be referenced as the same exact expression. So just to actually show you guys this, let's save this workflow. And I'm going to say, my name is Nate. I like to eat ice cream. Make up a funny story about me. Okay, so we'll send this off, and the response that we should get will be one that is actually about me, and it's going to have some sort of element of a story with ice cream. So let's take a look. So it said, sure, Nate, here's a funny story for you. And actually, because we're setting it, it's coming through a little weird. So let's actually click into here to look at it. Okay, so here is the story. Let me just make this a little bigger. I can go ahead and drag the configuration panel around by doing this. I can also make it larger or smaller if I do this. So let's just make it small. We'll move it all the way to the left, and let's read this story. So it said, sure, Nate, here's a funny story just for you. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Nate who loved ice cream more than anything else in the world. One day, Nate decided to invent the ultimate ice cream. A flavor so amazing that it would make the entire town go crazy. So let's skip ahead to the bottom. Basically what happens is, from that day on, Nate's stand became the funniest spot in town, a place where you never knew if you'd get a sweet, savory, or plain silly ice cream. And Nate, he became the legendary ice cream wizard. That sounds awesome. So that's exactly how you guys can see. What happened was, in this OpenAI node, we have a dynamic input, which was us talking to this thing in a chat trigger. We drag in that variable that represents what we type into the user prompt, and this is going to get sent to OpenAI's model of GPT 4.1 mini because we configured this node to do so. And the reason we were able to actually successfully do that is because we put in our API key or our password for OpenAI. And then on the right, we get this output, which we can look at either in schema view, table view, or JSON view, but they all represent the same data. As you can see, this is the exact story we just read. Something I wanted to talk about real quick that is going to be super helpful for the rest of this course is just understanding what is JSON. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's just a way to identify things. And the reason why it's so important to talk about is because over here, right, we all kind of know what schema is. It's just kind of like the way something's broken down. And as you can see, we have different drill downs over here, and we have different things to reference. Then we all understand what a table is. It's kind of like a table view of different objects with different things within them, kind of like the subfolders. And once again, you can also drag and drop from table view as well. And then we have JSON, which also you can drag and drop. Don't worry, you can drag and drop pretty much this whole platform, which is why it's awesome. But this may look a little more codey or intimidating, but I want to talk about why it is not. So first of all, JSON is so important because everything that we do is pretty much going to be built on top of JSON. Even the workflows that you're going to download later when you'll see like, hey, you can download this template for free. When you download that, it's going to be a JSON file, which means the whole workflow in n8n is basically represented as JSON. And so hopefully that doesn't confuse you guys. But what it is it's literally just key value pairs. So what I mean by that is like over here, the key is index and index equals 0. And then we have like the role of the OpenAI assistant, and that's the key. And the value of the role is assistant. So it's very natural language if you really break it down. What is the content that we're looking at? The content that we're looking at is this actual content over here. But like I said, the great thing about that is that pretty much every single large language model, or like ChatGPT, Claude 3.5, they're all trained on JSON and they all understand it so well because it's universal. So right here on the left, we're looking at JSON. If I was to just copy this entire JSON, go into ChatGPT and say, hey, help me understand this JSON. And then I just basically pasted that in there. It's going to be able to tell us exactly like which keys are in here and what those values are. So it says, this JSON represents the response from an AI model like ChatGPT in a structured format. Let me break it down for you. So basically it's going to explain what each part of this JSON means. We can see the index is 0. That means it's the first response. We can see the role equals assistant. We can see that the content is the funny story about Nate. We can see all this stuff, and it basically is able to not only break it down for us, but let's say we need to make JSON. We could say, hey, I have this natural language. Can you make that into JSON for me? Hey, can you help me make a JSON body where my name is Nate, I'm 23 years old, I went to the University of Iowa, I like to play pickleball. We'll send that off. And basically, we'll be able to turn that into JSON for us. So here you go. We can see name, Nate, age 23, education, University of Iowa, interests, pickleball. And so don't let it overwhelm you. If you ever need help either making JSON or understanding JSON, throw it into chat and it will do a phenomenal job for you. And actually, just to show you guys that I'm not lying, let's just copy this JSON that chat gave us, go back into our workflow, and I'm just going to add a set field just to show you guys. And instead of manual mapping, I'm just going to set some data using JSON. So I'm going to delete this, paste in exactly what chat gave me, hit test step, and what do we see over here? We see the name of someone named Nate, we see their age, we see their education, and we see their interests in either schema, table, or JSON view. So hopefully that gives you guys some reassurance, and just once again, JSON's super important, and it's not even code. That is just a really quick foundational understanding of a trigger, different nodes, action nodes, AI nodes. You have a ton to play with, and that's kind of like the whole most overwhelming part about n8n is you know what you need to do in your brain, but you don't know maybe which is the best n8n node to actually get that job done. So that's kind of the tough part, is it's a lot of just getting the reps in, understanding what node is best for what, but I assure you by the time your 2-week trial is up, you'll have mastered pretty much all that. All right, but something else I want to show you guys is now what we're looking at is called the editor. So if you look at the top middle right here, we have an editor, and this is where we can, zoom out, we can move around, we can basically edit our workflow right here, and it moves from left to right, as you guys saw, the same way we read from left to right. And now, because we've done a few runs and we've tested out these different nodes, what we'll click into is executions. And this will basically show us the different times we've ran this workflow, and what's cool about this is it will show us the data that has moved through. So let's say you set up a workflow that every time you get an email, it's going to send some sort of automated response. You could come into this workflow, you could click on executions, and you could go look at what time they happened, what actually came through, what email was sent, all that kind of stuff. So if I go all the way down to this third execution, we can remember that what I did earlier was I asked this node to tell us a joke. We also had a manual trigger rather than a chat trigger, and we can see this version of the workflow. I could now click into this node and I could see this is when we had it configured to tell us a joke, and we could see the actual joke it told us, which was about scientists not trusting atoms. And obviously we can still manipulate this stuff, look at schema, look at table, and do the same thing on that left-hand side as well. So I want to talk about how you can import templates into your own n8n environment because it's super cool. And like I said, they're all kind of built on top of JSON. So I'm going to go to n8n's website and we're going to go to product and we're going to scroll down here to templates. And you can see there's over 2,100 workflow automation templates. So let's scroll down. Let's say we want to do this one with cloning viral TikToks with AI avatars. And we can use this one for free. So I'll click on use for free. And what's cool is we can either copy the template to clipboard, or since we're in the cloud workspace, we could just import it right away. And so this is logged into my my main cloud instance, but I'll still show you guys how this works. I would click on this button. It would pull up this screen where I just get to set up a few things. So there's going to be different things we'd have to connect to. So you would basically just select your different credentials if you already had them set up. If not, you could create them right here. And then you would just basically be able to hit continue. And as this loads up, you see we have the exact template right there to play with. Or let's say you're scrolling on YouTube and you see just a phenomenal Nate Herc YouTube video that you want to play around with. All you have to do is go to my free school community and you will come into YouTube resources or search for the title of the video. And let's say you wanted to play with this shorts automation that I built. What you'll see right here is a JSON file that you'll have to download. Once you download that, you'll go back into n8n, create a new workflow, and then when you import that from file, if you click on this button right here, you can see the entire workflow comes in, and then all you're gonna have to do is follow the setup guide in order to connect your own credentials to these different nodes. All right, and then the final thing I wanted to talk about is inactive versus active workflows. So you may have noticed that none of our executions actually counted up from 0, and the reason is because this is counting active workflow executions. And if we come up here to the top right, we can see that we have the ability to make a workflow active, but it has to have a trigger node that requires activation. So real quick, let's say that we come in here and we want a workflow to start when we have a schedule trigger. So I would go to schedule and I would basically say, okay, I want this to go off every single day at midnight as we have here. And what would happen is while this workflow is inactive, it's only actually going to run if we hit test workflow and then it runs. But if we were to flick this on as active, now it says your scheduled trigger will now trigger executions on the schedule you have defined. These executions will not show up immediately in the editor, but you can see them in the execution list. So this is basically saying two things. It's saying now that we have the scheduled trigger set up to run at midnight, it's actually going to run at midnight because it's active. If we left this inactive, it would not actually run. And all it meant by the second part is if we were sitting in this workflow at midnight, we wouldn't see it execute and go spinning and green and red in live real time, but it would still show up as an execution. But if it's an active workflow, you just don't get to see them live visually running and spinning anymore. So that's the difference between an active workflow and an inactive workflow. Let's say you have a trigger that's like, let's say you have a HubSpot trigger where you want this basically to fire off the workflow whenever a new contact is created. So you'd connect to HubSpot and you would make this workflow active so that it actually runs if a new contact's created. If you left this inactive, even though it says it's going to trigger on new contact, it would not actually do so unless this workflow was active. So that's a super important thing to remember. All right, and then one last thing I want to talk about, which we're not going to dive into because we'll see examples later, is there is one more way that we can see data rather than schema, table, or JSON, and it's something called binary. So binary basically just means an image or maybe a big PDF or a Word doc or a PowerPoint file. It's basically something that's not explicitly text-based. So let me show you exactly what that might look like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another trigger into this workflow, and I'm going to click on tab. And even though it doesn't say like what triggers this workflow, we can still access different triggers. So I'm just going to type in form, and this is going to give us a form submission that basically is an n8n native form. And you can see there's an option at the bottom for triggers. So I'm going to click on this trigger. Now, basically what this pulls up is another configuration panel, but obviously we don't have an input because it's a trigger, but we are going to get an output. So anyways, let me just set up a quick example form. I'm just going to say, the title of this form is demo. The description is binary data. And now what happens if I click on test step, it's going to pull up this form. And as you can see, we haven't set up like any fields for people to actually submit stuff. So the only option is to submit. But when I hit submit, you can see that the node has been executed. And now there's actually data in here submitted at with a timestamp. And then we have different information right here. So let me just show you guys, we can add a form element. And when I'm adding a form element, we can basically have this be, date, it can be a dropdown, it can be an email, it can be a file, it can be text. So real quick, I'm just going to show you an example where let's say we have a form where someone has to submit their name. We have the option to add a placeholder or make it required. And this isn't really the bulk of what I'm trying to show you guys. I just want to show you binary data. But anyways, let's say we're adding another field that's going to be a file. I'm just going to say file, and this will also be required. And now if I go ahead and hit test step, it's going to pull up a new form for us with a name parameter and a file parameter. So what I did is I put my name and I put in just a YouTube short that I had published, and you can see it's an MP4 file. So if I hit submit, we're going to get this data pulled into n8n, as you can see in the background. Just go ahead and watch. The form is going to actually capture this data. There you go, form submitted. And now what we see right here is binary data. So this is interesting, right? We still have our schema, we still have our table, we still have our JSON, but what this is showing us is basically, okay, the name that the person submitted was Nate. The file, here is some information about it as far as the name of it, the MIME type, and the size, but we don't actually access the file through table or JSON or schema view. The only way we can access a video file is through binary. And as you can see, if I clicked on view, it's my actual video file right here. And so that's all I really wanted to show you guys was when you're working with PDFs or images or videos, a lot of times they're going to come through as binary, which is a little confusing at first, but it's not too bad. And we will cover an example later in this tutorial where we look at a binary file and we process it. But as you can see now, if we were doing a next node, we would have schema, table, JSON, and binary. So we're still able to work with the binary, we're still able to reference it, but I just wanted to throw out there, when you see binary, don't get scared. It just basically means it's a different file type. It's not just text.